Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Career Speaker Series with our guest, Ryan Harvey. I'm Nick Simino. I'm going to be our host for today. I'm the outreach coordinator and general help out students get placed into jobs after college here at Delgado Community College. So I'll be our host for today. Ryan is joining us to speak about his experience in his career in the academic and professional and public service kind of realms. But just a quick note about what this Career Speaker Series is if this is the first time that you've joined us. So Delgado puts on the Career Speaker Series. The Computer Information Technology Department tries to give students an opportunity to see what a working professional's experience is like. So if you're interested in a career in technology, we've got folks who are in the industry who can tell you about what that process and that path looks like from, if you've just recently graduated high school or you're kind of coming back to technology from another career. Your experience, it's not going to be into the job overnight necessarily. There might be a kind of a story and a path that occurs. So Ryan's going to take us through his path today. But the quick, he's going to have the conversation, and if you have questions, he's willing to answer them. But we will have time at the end for questions as well. So if you want to unmute or put those in the chat, however you feel comfortable. We do ask, just kind of ground rules, be respectful, those kinds of things. This will be available on YouTube when we're done. So if you hear something that you want to go back to, or if you have a friend or colleague who you think might be interested in this conversation, you will be able to share this presentation with them. So that being said, if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email, but I'm going to allow Ryan to introduce himself and get started here.
Hey everyone, I'm Ryan Harvey. So I'm currently a staff software engineer at Screencastify, which is a Chicago-based startup. I work remotely from home full-time. I also occasionally teach computer science courses at Loyola here in the city, and I also do a whole bunch of volunteer work, public service-oriented volunteer work. And so I'll talk a little bit about sort of my path on those things. I do want to say that I am open to questions at any time. So if I'm talking about something and you want me to dive farther into it, or if you have a question about what I'm saying, please definitely raise a hand or whatever, and I'll try to answer your questions. So I've been doing this for probably 25 years now. It's been a long time. I, as a kid, was one of those kids that geeked out about computers from the time I was, 8 or 10 years old. Back in those days, we didn't have fancy video games like we have now, but we did have the Atari, and I had an Atari 2600, and I played that a lot. And then we got a I think it was a 8088 with the red turbo button on it that you could push, and the processor would go double speed. You could mess with your siblings when playing Flight Simulator, and just turn speed up on them. We then got like a 286, and I think it was about that point that I started like really diving into GW basic programming and that kind of stuff, and like really kind of like trying to figure out how this thing works, right? I started at that point also taking apart computers, which was not something my parents were very excited about, because they saw it as a very expensive thing that I was going to destroy. But I think through all of that, it was very like self-led exploratory kind of stuff. I was having fun with it. I had a friend in junior high and in 8th grade, we actually wrote a piece of software and sold it to a company. We didn't have a company, we didn't have anything. We just we wrote the software and we gave it to them, and we got, I think, like $600 for it that we split. And it was, 2 junior high kids writing a piece of software, which from a business investment standpoint now seems like a bonkers thing to do. but I guess it worked. And so through high school, I had like part-time jobs. There was a computer repair shop near the high school that I worked at after school, just doing like hardware repairs and like operating system debugging and stuff like that. And I worked for a little bit in my junior year, senior year, I don't know, at the school board office in the Management Information Systems Department. Built the first website for the St. Charles Parish School Board, and actually got an inkjet printer from Tulane University for that. I won a contest with that website. It was pretty fun. And then I went to college, and I studied math computer science in college. I loved every bit of it. I devoured the classes. I really had a great time. And I also did a minor in Japanese studies on the side. And after college, I decided I was going to go to Japan for 2 years. And I did. I went on the JET program, and I taught English in Japan for 2 years. And then when I came back, I was looking at like, what do I do next? And I didn't have any jobs lined up. And I ended up going to grad school and doing enrolling in a PhD program, but I ended up getting a master's and stopping before I finished the PhD in applied mathematics and scientific computing. And while I was doing that, I also didn't have any funding lined up, so I was also working while I was doing that. So I managed to get a graduate assistantship at the university for the first year to kind of tide me along and provide sustenance. And then ended up getting a full-time job and doing school part-time after that, starting with defense contractor, BAE Systems, where I did really like research-oriented coding. So the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency has a bunch of like really wild research prospectuses that they want you to try things on and that they'll fund. And so this group that I was in was looking at some of those, and we were doing some signal processing oriented research. And so I ended up writing a lot of code for that, mostly in MATLAB and C. From there, I went on to that work was good, but defense contractors tend to be pretty intense in terms of schedule. And I was working 60, 70-hour weeks and didn't have a lot of time for grad school. And also I was married, and so I was trying to spend time with my wife, and we were looking to start a family. And so I ended up, after we had my daughter, I ended up changing jobs and going to Social Security Administration, which is a government position, career federal position. And I did a variety of things there. It was actually a really interesting place. I managed to get myself enrolled in like a leadership development kind of thing, where they would allow me to rotate every 6 to 8 months to a different group. I got a lot of different types of experience, some of them a little more management oriented, some of them deep in writing code or in architecting code, a lot of user requirements kind of analysis kind of stuff. I did some integration work with different third-party APIs. And I also, at the end of that Social Security work, I got to work in a group that was doing what's called microsimulation modeling of how changes in Social Security policy that were proposed would affect subgroups of the population over the next 10 to 70 years. Who would be the winners and losers under those policies, and how would that impact them from an income standpoint. And that was really kind of exciting work. I really enjoyed that. And from there, I kind of got recruited into a group at the White House Office of Management and Budget. Kind of spent about 4 years there doing some actual like coding software work, but a lot of like architecture and technical direction and project management oriented stuff, product management oriented stuff. I had teams of contractors working under me who were doing most of the actual building. But I really got sort of my test in how management works and how to organize people to get work done there. And then toward the end of that, we were coming up on a change in administrations that always creates a little bit of havoc, particularly at the White House. I was doing more management than I wanted to be, and I missed writing code. And so I started looking for other things. I ended up joining TED conferences as a senior engineer there, and spent about 4 years there doing some pretty exciting work. Some machine learning, some video engineering oriented stuff. And that team broke up due to some management changes that caused havoc in engineering culture. So a lot of the team left at that point, and I stayed for a little while, but then I also left. From there, I went to a startup called Healthify. They then got bought out. When they got bought out, I left and went to another startup, Screencastify, which is where I am now, and enjoying it. And so, and I'm a staff engineer there. I'm doing pretty much most kinds of engineering, I would say. Like, I'm doing some architecture, I'm doing DevOps oriented stuff, incident response oriented stuff. I'm doing video engineering, application engineering, all of the above. Just depends on the day and what's needed at the moment. So that's kind of the professional side of things. On the academic side, I've always had this kind of thread. I mentioned I went to grad school. I've had this thread of like enjoying mostly signal processing oriented numerical computing kind of stuff. I've always toyed with that on the side. I play music, so I love dealing with audio kind of stuff. I've enjoyed working with video quite a bit. And so I also occasionally, so I went to Loyola University for undergrad. When I came back to New Orleans after being in DC at the federal government for a while, I reached out to the department at Loyola and said, hey, like, I would love to teach a class or two here or there. And got set up as an adjunct, and I've taught a few courses there now, mostly around software engineering, kind of capstone oriented courses, or around internet technology based stuff, network protocols and those sorts of things. So I've done that. And then I also have this kind of undercurrent of volunteer public service work that I've been doing. I got involved in that when I was in federal government because there's a lot of large scale work, change work that happens in government, but it's often on a very long time scale, on the order of a decade or more. And I wanted to be involved in things that were changing faster than that as well. And so I got involved then with Code for America in the DC brigade up there, and started contributing to projects in looking at availability of public education, looking at voter knowledge of candidate financing, those kinds of things. And then ended up starting my own meetup about, it's called data wrangling, but basically like if you think about data analysis and data science, like the first step of any process there is to like figure out what data you have and clean it up into a data set that you can actually use for analysis. And so it was about that initial step, which is often like a lot of the work of a data analysis process. So I ran a meetup on that, brought in speakers and things for that. I also, from there, I got involved with a group called Ruby for Good. So I did a fair amount of Ruby programming in the government, and Ruby for Good partners with, they work throughout the year remotely, but they also do these events where they spend 4 days and they bring in a bunch of people, and people just mob on building software for groups that need it. And so they partner with these nonprofits that have some specific tech need that they can't fulfill and don't have financing to fulfill. And they help build a piece of software for them to help solve that problem. And so I participated in that several years, and I also led a project with them for that. So that has been really good. And then when I came back to New Orleans, I was looking for Code for New Orleans, right? The Code for America Brigade here. Turns out there was one that was recently started, like I guess restarted by a guy, Mark Sinak here. And he was in a position where he wasn't able to like maintain the organizing piece of it as much. So I jumped in and started helping out, and eventually became like a co-captain of the brigade. And eventually he stepped back, and now I'm brigade captain for the last several years. And I've been doing that for a while, and we've done work on a national scale with other brigades to do shelter and food and water distribution tracking during hurricane responses. We've done, we have a tracker to do for that. We did a bunch of work to build a scraper of the city assessors website to be able to get tax assessment data in a reasonable data set. Recently, we've been working on a big project to put together what I'll call a pre-joined relational database with the city's public data sets, so that you can look at, for example, I want to look at short-term rental properties, and I want to see their tax assessments, and I also want to see their crime statistics in that area, all joined by police district, right? And you can kind of do those sort of cross data set queries a little more easily. So we've been working on that for a while. There's also a project we're working on right now that is led by Code for America, that's looking at our 911 data and trying to identify call types that don't need a police response, that could be responded to by other programs and services available in the city, and to try to look at how we could enable dispatchers to have a different diversion of response for those. So that's kind of an interesting project too. So that's kind of like, I guess, the overview of 25, 30 years of career. I'm definitely open to any questions anyone has. I'm happy to talk through anything.
Yeah, Ryan, we got one in the chat here. It says, does the Mario hat represent you being on the offensive red team for cybersecurity? And second question, for the government position jobs, did you have military experience when you were applying for those positions?
So no, the Mario hat is just because I like Mario and I felt like wearing it. So I also have a Luigi hat back here. So yeah, it's not anything representative or anything like that. And no, I didn't have any military experience when applying for the government positions. I actually, I was looking for a specific thing when I took the first government position. I was at a grad school job fair, one of these job fairs where there's like a billion tables and like everybody has a recruiter in front of them and you're just kind of handing out resumes all over the place. And so I was doing that, but I had my daughter, who was like a year old, on my shoulder because it was my day to watch my daughter. My wife was at work. And so I was at this job fair, like carting my daughter around. And I was kind of watching the responses of the recruiters, and like some of them I got a side eye from, and some of them were like hesitant when talking to me. And there was one recruiter from Social Security Administration who literally like jumped out in the hall in front of me and was like, I see you're in computer science and mathematics. Like we're really looking for folks in that realm. We have a really family friendly workplace. I'd love to talk to you. And like that kind of stood out. And so I, stopped and talked to her for a bit. And it turned out that it really was, all the things she was saying. It was kind of a great approach. I did have to go through the full government application process and interview process, which is long and not fun. But yeah, I made it through. So
we have a few questions coming in. I saw Brandon had raised his hand. Brandon, you have a question?
Hello, yes. Good morning, guys. All right. So the question I have is like y'all talk about getting like a job or anything like that, right? But I've been trying to apply for jobs, anything like that, but my experience has to be like over like 2 years at least or something like that. But I'm barely in college right now, so I don't know if you guys know like anywhere like that they are hiring or anything like that. Like college students for internships or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's actually kind of a common problem, is that there is a sort of a baseline amount of experience that a lot of companies want before they bring you on. And the first job that gives you that initial experience is the hard thing to find. I think bespoke internship programs are really good for that. And if you can find one, that's definitely worthwhile. Use your college career services, like they know about those internship programs and they can help you find those things. The other thing that I would say is, in New Orleans specifically, we have a pretty good developer community, and there's a number of senior engineers around that can talk to you and that can talk to you about the companies that they work for. And if you get to know them, often, getting to know people is the best way to get your foot in the door for the next job. And so there is, I know usually there's a gathering around 7:00 on Tuesday nights at the Rusty Nail. And so a bunch of software developers gather there and just chat. And it's very informal. They just talk, maybe have a drink, but there's a lot of talk about software and about their work and about, what's going on at the job at the moment. And that's a good place to sort of learn about how workplaces work and how different companies operate, and identify the kinds of things that you want to like really work toward getting to. So I definitely recommend, find the meetups, find the gatherings where other software developers, other IT folks are getting together, and try to get be part of that crowd, right? And get to know folks.
All right, that sounds good. So I should be going to that place pretty soon. And I actually have another question. So if I want to learn how to create, like, because I've been thinking about doing this one app for one of my classes I have, and it's like a kind of like a GPS, kind of like that.
Okay.
And I'm trying to see like which programming language could be useful, you know, because I've been trying to learn Python, but I really want to learn like something that can help me, like, you know, kind of learn more about like GPS applications and stuff like that.
I would say use the language you're most comfortable with at the moment. You know, if you have learned some Python and you feel comfortable with Python, dive into that language and get to know that language really well. There's a lot of companies out there that use Python, right? And you're going to find GPS libraries for any language, any general purpose language you look at. So definitely look around and find the libraries that you need for that. But I think I've seen a lot of newer career folks try to take on a project where they need to learn a whole bunch of new stuff, like how does GPS work and how do I work with it? And they try to add learning a whole new language to that at the same time. And it's just overload. It ends up stalling the project because there's too much to take in at once. And so I would say, like, stick with the thing that you're more comfortable with, learn the library for GPS and learn how GPS works and learn how to work with it. But don't take on learning a whole new language at the same time. I think that's not a productive way to do that.
All right. Thank you so much for your advice, sir.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Right on. I saw the next question, Chris Morrison.
Oh, hey, thank you very much, Nick. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Cool. All right. First of all, so honored that you're here with us, Ryan. You know, I appreciate you. We met quite some time ago, many moons ago, back at the what I think eventually became the Code for NOLA meetup back in the day. Pretty cool. I especially love the aspect of the way that you look at public service. You know, giving back to the community. Doing your own thing, and the leadership roles that you take on too. It's totally great that you're here, and so glad you're here for our students. I had a couple questions here. Yeah, well, first of all, I posted in the comment section, or in the chat, I posted the link to, I think it was the Tuesday night hack night that you're alluding to. I think that's right. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Right on, just for our students to check out. Again, a great spot, like Ryan mentioned, to meet other folks. And some of those folks are working remotely. And I guess this kind of like alludes to the question that I was going to ask you. Sometimes internships can be hard to get, especially like the bespoke ones. And so I guess just looking at your career and the organizations that you've been a part of, would you suggest that our students do things like work with organizations like Code for NOLA to, oh yeah, exactly, the NOLA Dev Slack, nice, thank you. Are there any organizations that you would suggest maybe that our students maybe get involved with, maybe do some volunteering with, or some kind of like work with nonprofits and things like that to get experience potentially to put as part of their resume?
Yeah, I think I think like any of the public service ones out there are really good. There's so Code for America is one. There's probably, you know, there's local brigades around. That work is not always coding work, so it depends like what you're looking to do. That work often is understanding problems, like, you know, going out and talking to people in the community and trying to understand what are the problems that need to be solved, right? There is definitely a little bit of coding work that happens there once you figure out a project and try to go through that. But there's also a lot of just looking through data and that kind of stuff. There are a slew of open source projects out there if you just search GitHub for a topic that you're interested in. And I think actually GitHub also has like a topic that they curate of public good open source projects. Those are all good to get involved with. And I would say, like, don't feel like you have to build a whole app, right? Like, if you tackle one issue on an open source project, that's something you can put in your portfolio, right? Like, if you can get that solution merged into a bigger open source project that like is publicly visible, that's a publicly visible piece of your work that you can then show to employers, right? And so I would say, like, you know, what are you interested in, right? Find that thing and then go searching for that thing in open source, and you'll find projects. Like, there's literally thousands and thousands of projects out there. Find one you're interested in, pick an issue, and just start, you know.
Very good. That's good advice. Thank you so much. And then I guess my second parter there, sorry to take time here, guys. No, I know you've been relatively successful in your career, especially working remotely and things like that as well. Is there any advice that you'd give to our students or anyone looking to kind of work remotely, still live in maybe Louisiana, and kind of like any tips and tricks and things?
Yeah, I think in the first 2 or 3 years of your career, it's a little harder. You're learning the craft, you're learning the workplace, you're learning how to interact with a team. That's harder to do 100% remote if you haven't done it before. So I think there is some value in being in a workplace in the first few years. It can be done. It's a little harder for those first few years. Once you have a hang of the job, once you understand how the job works, how the workplace works, that kind of thing, it becomes a whole lot easier. And the tips that I would give you for sort of doing that effectively, the first one is over communicate. Right? People can't see you in the office anymore, right? When you're remote. And so, you know, make use of, if you have Slack or if you have Microsoft Teams or whatever, make use of that presence feature. Like, tell people when you're online, put your status, like, what are you working on? You know, make yourself available for like one-on-one conversations. Reach out to your team in whatever your team's chat is and say, like, hey, I'm working on this thing and I need some help. Can anyone pair? You know, those kinds of things are like really important. Make sure you communicate to your manager, like, regularly what the status of what you're working on is. I think those things become way more important in a remote setting than they are when you're in the office and somebody can just pop by your office door or your cubicle door for like 5 seconds and say, hey, can you give me a status on this thing, right? You don't have that ability as easily in a remote setting. And so you need to be more proactive about communicating. The other thing I would say is try to get some clarity early in the position on what the performance rating setup is for your role. Because in a remote setting, like, a lot of your work is going to end up being a little more self-directed. And so you need to know, like, what are the company goals? What are your goals, right? What, like, when you come to your performance rating, whether it's quarterly or annually or whatever, what are they going to be rating you on, so that you know how to prioritize the work that you need to do along the way, to make sure that you're hitting your marks as you go. So those are kind of the two big things. I think like proactive, focused communication, and then like really being clear on What are your goals? What are the metrics that you're trying to hit?
Thank you.
Right on. I'm trying to catch all the questions in order. So I think next was Claude's question from a student. Is there a framework or library which you can use to query or scrape public data sets easily?
That's a good question. It depends, as with everything in technology, it depends. A lot of, like, if you're looking for city data, a lot of cities, including New Orleans, use a platform called Socrata to publish their data. And so Socrata has an API mechanism to access that data. They have web-based tools to do some simple visualizations and to do some querying across that data. So like, that's probably the first place I would start if you're looking at city level data. Federal data is a little bit all over the map. It depends on the agency and that kind of stuff. Yes, that's the service. And if you go to, for New Orleans in particular, if you go to data.nola.gov, that's here, I'll just put that in here. There's data.nola.gov, there's gis.nola.gov. So those are websites that then like link back to Socrata data. So when you find a data set there and you click on it, you'll end up in a Socrata UI for that. So I think that's the best place to start. For federal data, like some of that's available via Socrata or something like that. Some of that you just have to go to the agency and find the data. And they are going to have a download link for CSV or a download link for a zip file or a download link for whatever, and you kind of get it and work with it that way. So
right on. And then we've got sorry, were you still going, Ryan?
Well, there was a follow-up here. What about shipment data? I'm not sure what we mean by shipment data. Exports and imports, you're probably the best data you're going to find from that is going to be from some place like the Department of Commerce or the U.S. Trade Representative would be the places I would start looking for that. I haven't actually worked with that kind of data, but that's the place I would go first.
Right on. And we got a hand up. Is this Gisela Sussman?
Yeah, sorry, it's Jayla, but I mostly go by Zay. I'm sorry, I'm just getting over COVID.
No worries.
Yeah, so I might come off at like sounding a little bad right now, but I'll try. So anyway, I am actually in IT right now. It's not software engineering at all. I mean, what you do is amazing, but I'm wondering, do you know anything like along the lines of like cloud computing, and do you recommend that like field, like in what part of cloud computing should I go into?
Yes. So as a software developer today, you actually work with cloud computing quite a lot, and so I've done a whole lot of work building out infrastructure in both Amazon Web Services and in Google Cloud in different jobs. Current job is Google Cloud. I think so. My two roles in the federal government were both IT specialist and IT manager roles, right? So they were not specifically software development. I ended up doing a lot of software development in them because I had that skill set, but they were both IT roles. And so I think the big difference there is mostly perspective. So the details of a given project could involve some software development, and for that, if you don't have that skill set, you find a contractor and you hire them and they do the software development, right? They could involve an infrastructure build or a new machine install in a data center or those kinds of things. the key for IT is going to be understanding and being able to build out capacity estimates for what you're doing, and to think about cost and timeline and those kinds of things like that. Those are the things that are, I think, more looked for in an IT related role than in a software development role. Software development role, they ask you for estimates, but it's mostly your product manager who is doing a lot of the timeline thinking and a lot of the cost estimate thinking. Whereas in an IT role, that becomes more of your role to do that kind of perspective thinking. So I think that's what I would think about as part of that. I do think it is a booming field, so it's a really great place to be. So there's a ton of work in IT to do out there. You need to figure out, like, IT is also one of those really broad things that has a lot of different subsets, and so you need to figure out, like, what is the piece of IT that you really enjoy, and then find some roles that can let you do more of that, and less of the things that you find frustrating, right? Does that make sense?
Because I actually work in I work in the customer like support side of it more, like.
Okay, I've done that too.
Yeah, so like I take calls and blah blah blah, right? But I know that there's like a lot of like you can go and be a field tech, working more with like hands-on, and then you're just in the background maybe doing other stuff, working with like budget, like how you're saying. But yeah, thank you for that insight. But
yeah, I would say, like, if you think you would like to get more into the technical side of things, learning the Linux command line is like a superpower skill. If you know the Linux command line, it takes you from being able to do IT roles that are more customer service focused, more project management oriented, to being able to do actual, like, server administration and that side of IT. And that opens up a lot of doors into other things. And so if you think you'd like to go that direction, start diving into Linux command line. It'll serve you very well.
Okay. Now I have one more question for you.
Okay.
At one point I was interested in being like a software engineer. I might still be interested in that, but one thing I'm scared of is, like, so people always say, oh, you gotta breathe, you gotta eat, you gotta sleep, code. Yes. I mean, is that true?
No, you have to breathe air, and you have to sleep on a bed, and you have to eat food. No, like, I think it gets that reputation because a lot of people are very passionate about it. That doesn't have to be you. You can be a software developer and have a life on the side, and it's okay. I think it does require a little bit of a different way of thinking about problems and thinking about how to solve problems. And so that's something that you need to get used to and practice and get good at, right? But that can be a mode of thinking, just like you have other modes of thinking, and you can very easily, like, you can take on, like, I'm going to go into my work mode now and turn on that mode of thinking for work, and then step back and have a life or whatever afterwards. So, there's a lot of, like, I think, very damaging myth that gets created out of the Silicon Valley culture kind of thing. And I think it's very important to know that, like, any of these jobs that you want to choose, you can do those jobs as a job and still do other things on the side. So.
Okay, thank you, because I was getting stressed even thinking about.
Yeah. No, it's just a
class,
skill set. So
anything.
it requires study and practice, and you'll get it. But it's a skill set, and you apply that skill set at work, and you can do other things on the side. So
Thank you for your time.
Yep.
We have a few more questions in the chat from Claude's Classroom. Any tips for finding internships in programmer, analyst, software dev type careers? And then the second question, what is the value of having a portfolio, and how does an organization value it? How do they evaluate it? Does it really matter in your experience?
So I think I'll start with the second one and then go back to the first one. So yes, having a portfolio is important. I think the best portfolios that I've seen are either well done GitHub profiles that point to specific projects that they've worked on, or a personal website that points back to gives a description of the project and points back to the project, or that kind of thing. What you want to be careful of there is telling the story of why that's important. Like what should I take, like as a person who's evaluating you for a position, like what should I take from that project? You know, what did you learn from that project? What are the things that you accomplished? What are you excited about that project? And so kind of like put a little bit of a story there, either in the README of the project, or like if you're doing it on your website in the little blurb about the project. I think, how do companies value it? Like I've interviewed a lot of people for positions. It is a piece of the evaluation, right? So for particularly for software development, right, you're going to have a number of questions that are just like, tell me about these prior things that you've done. Give me a sense of how you think about problem solving, or how you approach interaction with other people, working with a team, those kinds of things. You're going to have some technical assessments that might be like a live pairing kind of setup. It might be like a technical problem solving thing that they give you that's a timed thing. It might be like a little project that they give you a couple days to work on. There's going to be some technical assessment that you're going to like submit, and then somebody's going to go in and review it. And then there's going to be the portfolio review, which is going to be like, you know, hey, what has this person done before? What are they excited about? Like, what technologies do they know? Have they worked with? So yeah, I think like it's one piece of the package of like telling who you are, but it's also an important piece to put together. So I would spend some time on it. One of the things that can help with that is this idea of going out and finding open source projects and like pick an issue and get involved, right? That helps because you don't have to come up with an app all on your own, right? It's also more like real life in software development, right? When you go into a company, you're usually not starting from scratch and building a brand new app. You're usually starting with an existing code base, and there are a number of either new features or like bug issues that you need to resolve. And so you're starting with an existing code base. You have to learn that code base enough to be able to contribute to it. You have to understand the issue that's there. You have to figure out how to solve that issue, right? You do all the same things when you take on an issue in an open source project. And you often do it more independently in that setting because there's less of an infrastructure around you like you have in a company when you start working on a new code base. And so being able to do that effectively, being able to go in and solve a problem in an open source project and get that solution merged by the maintainers shows that you can do the job. Like it's practical evidence that you can do the job that you're being hired for as a software engineer. And so that's the one thing that I will say, like I will stress, is that's a really solid ticket to getting a job, because it shows that you can do the job practically, right? And so the more you can do that kind of thing, and then as you do more of those, like you can get more involved in a particular project that you get excited about and become a maintainer of that project, right? It won't happen overnight. It'll take maybe a year or 2 years or whatever. But the more of those kinds of things that you have, the easier and easier and easier it gets to go find a job somewhere, because you can point at those things as your portfolio. So finding internships piece, I will say, like, it always helps to have the portfolio. So whatever you have now, like, put it together in something that's presentable and show it off. If you have code that you've written that you can share, put it on GitHub, make repos for it, put it on GitHub and make sure it's visible. And then, once you've done your homework and you have your stuff ready, go work with your career services at the university. Like, go, ask questions, get help with your resume, ask for help finding those internships, because they often have contacts with a lot of different companies that do this. So hopefully that answers all those questions.
Ryan, I have a similar related question. Something that I'm working through, as an instructor here at Delgado, is that, in many ways, the academic paradigm, the way that we work through school, you enroll in a class, your instructor gives you assignments, and then you kind of get a grade at the end. Do you notice, because you have academic teaching experience as well and workplace experience, is kind of the shift, we've gone through school this kind of way and then work is different. Do you have any comments on that or thoughts on that in your experience as a teacher, but also as someone who's managed and hired people in the work?
I have a lot of thoughts on that. So when I teach, now I will caveat this, I generally teach 300, 400 level, later classes. So the students that come to me generally have basic programming knowledge already. They're not learning it from scratch. I think there is definitely a place for toy projects, for small one file pieces of code when you're doing the sort of the basics, right? Like the learning the basics of writing code and that kind of thing. I think for software development, it is naturally an iterative process. It is a team-based process in the workplace. You're very rarely a lone coder these days, and you're usually working on existing code bases. And so what I've tried to do, for example, when I teach software engineering, I try to find a project, a public service project that we can contribute to. I try to engage the maintainers of that project to actually be product managers in the process, in the course. And I have the students form teams and work on that project during the semester. And we use that as a lab while we learn all the theory around agile software development and around the various practices associated with that, and the how retrospectives work and those kinds of things. And we can actually do those practices at the same time as we're learning about them. And I find that it makes it real for people, right? It lets students have that experience and then be able to say hey, I understand how to write this code, but I don't know how to figure out what code I'm supposed to be writing because I don't know how to understand the issue, right? That I'm working on. And so then we talk about communication. We talk about asking the product manager and making sure that you nail down the requirements of the thing that you're working on. And then there are situations where they can write the code fine and the code works locally, but they don't know how to verify it, or they don't know how to commit it to Git, or get it up to the repo, or those kinds of things. And so all of those are practical issues that you will need to be able to do in the workplace that don't generally come up in the classroom because you're not in that setting where you need to worry about them. it makes teaching harder. It makes teaching a lot harder. There's a lot more work associated with getting one of those classes ready than a class where it's an existing syllabus and you have materials and you have. I think it's worth it. A lot of teachers don't. You know, it is pretty intense semester to go through. But yeah, that's kind of the thing that I would say. There are other approaches, like in the internet technologies class that I teach. It's a little bit more lecture focused. There's a lot of like detailed content that has to happen there. Learning about how TCP/IP works, learning about how data travels over a network line, those kinds of things. But there's also, and so for that, I tend to do little projects, but often I'll do projects a little bit more like what the workplace would be, where I'll create, you know, a sketch of a program, and I'll build out some tests that are failing. And I'll say, okay, hey, we got a bug here. You need to build out this feature to make this work for these things, right? Or things like that. So I'll set up my projects, hopefully for the students to do, hopefully to mimic a little bit more what they might see in the workplace. It's not exact, but it's, you know, it's trying to get as close as possible. Hopefully that helps.
Oh, for sure. Thank you. Got a question from Claude's Classroom. From a business perspective, what is the value of paying or not paying interns in a startup?
Most businesses generally will want to pay as little as possible for the work that is happening in their companies because it's a cost and they want to minimize their costs. I believe everyone should be paid for the work that they do. And so I am a big proponent of paid internships. If I'm in a company, I will be advocating for internships to be paid if they're not already. And so I would say, like, you definitely should be looking for paid internships first. At some point, you will need to work. And so if you can't find a paid internship, like, this is going back to that, like, that initial gap, like it's hard to get that first year or two of experience that people want to see to be able to hire you. You do need some work experience. So it's unfortunate that there's not enough paid internships out there to cover everyone. Definitely try to find those if you can, but if you can't, it could be worth taking on an unpaid internship. What you can often do, though, if it's unpaid, is you can negotiate the time. And you can say, like, you know, hey, I really want to do this, but because it's unpaid, I'm going to need to work on the side. Can I do 20 hours instead of 40 a week? And that gives you some time to do something else to bring in some income and be able to, like, support yourself while you're doing that. It's a really bad situation that we even have that offered by companies. But I think, yeah, I would say, to the extent you can, definitely go for a paid internship. Every company should be paying for their interns because they're doing work for you, you know.
Right on. Second question from the classroom. What is the success of getting a job in the field of computer and software development with a criminal record?
I honestly don't know. I think, like, there are certain sectors where that's more of a problem than not. I know in government, certain kinds of criminal record can be a problem. Certain kinds of criminal record are not a problem. So it really depends on the circumstances. If you're trying to get a job with a police department or something like that, it can be a problem. in general for software development, like if your criminal record was like money laundering from the company, that's going to be a red flag for any company trying to hire you. If your criminal record is, I don't know, if it's related to drug possession or something like that, you know, those kinds of things often companies will not worry about, or if they are concerned about it, they may ask for drug tests periodically or something like that. There are ways around it. I think that what I would say is to be open about it and upfront about it. And if it's a blocker, you'll know right away, right? So if the company is not going to be comfortable with it, they'll tell you early on, you know, if you're open about it. But I think also if you're open about it and you explain, you know, look, I have this in my past. I've moved on from it. I'm ready to work for this company. I would like that not to be an issue, and see what they say. And if there is a concern, then you can negotiate through it. A lot of times, I think you'll find there's not a concern. So, but again, it's very case by case kind of situation.
Well, thanks, Ryan. This we're kind of coming up on time. I don't know if we had any last questions, but I just wanted to say thank you so much for being here. Thanks to the students and everyone who asked all these really great questions. Do you have any parting words for us, Ryan?
Enjoy what you do and dive into it. That's what I did my whole career. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, absolutely. It was our pleasure and honor. And stay tuned for this to be posted on YouTube. And if you have any questions for me, a lot of those career-related internships and things like that, as Ryan alluded to, I would be happy to help you with that. I will provide my contact information for our students here. But thank you again so much and have a great day.
Have a great day.